All right, everybody, welcome back to the conclusion of our summer course and an investigation or a look at or discussion, an oversimplified summary discussion of this incredible book, Tip of the Spear by Dr. Orasami Burton. There isn't too much I want to say about the epilogue. It's incredibly powerful, and I just encourage everybody to read and reread it and try to let it sink in. But I did want to just remind again that as Burton has been consistent, we're meant to not ever forget the relationship between what's happening inside of prisons and what's happening outside of prisons. And that the uprising, the long Attica revolt that began in September of 1971 continues to this day and represents, like many of these related histories, a history that has been wildly distorted and reframed with a specific intent of manipulating how we in today's world see that world and consider even at all struggling against it. But as Burton says on 224, the primary aim of this book has been to show that U.S. prisons are a site of war. While the story I have told begins in the late 20th century, I am employed by a black radical interpretive framework that locates the origin of this war in the 16th century with the onset of the European trade in enslaved Africans, the rise of capitalism as a world system, and the global project of patriarchal white supremacy that underwrites it. He says on the next page, 225, something I think is also very important in terms of how we want to conclude, or I would like us to focus our conclusion of this course. By tracing the unfolding of this revolt's collision with the constantly mutating technologies of state violence, Tip of the Spear clarified the cultural asymmetry of this war. State actors waged an imperialist war, a war of capture and conquest that had the production of slaves as its unspoken object. This invocation of slavery does not depend on critical interpretations of the law, the 13th Amendment, Ruffin versus Commonwealth, etc., nor on uneven conditions of labor exploitation within carceral institutions, nor on grand theories of the ontological position of blackness under Western modernity. Neither does it depend solely on the voices of incarcerated people who frequently narrate themselves as slaves. Rather, it depends on a critical analysis of imperialist war and counterinsurgency in theory and practice. In my own humble, simplified version, this is my point about how we should understand media, prisons, etc., that there is an intent here. Whether we get into the details of its effect, its impact on us, which are important, or the particular mechanisms of its delivery, it's important that we understand that understanding this culturally asymmetric war that Burton is talking about requires that on our critical analysis of imperialist war and counterinsurgency in theory and practice, that we recognize the ongoing settler colonial project of the United States and its allies, the ongoing imperialism that plays out internally and internally in terms of prisons within prisons. What I think is so important that Burton does here is to get us to recognize the multivaried attack that this war or forms that this war takes. Sexual terror, propaganda, liberal reformism, white supremacist science and technology, an assault on our hopes and dreams, and the capacity for a black radical futurity, the goal to reduce the capacity for us to rebel by weakening our radical critical thinking capability, by obliterating certain narratives and histories and ideas, so that we could end up with the story that Burton tells us at the end, where by 1993, Brother Tyrone, who's on his way out of prison, having gone through all of these uprisings and struggles and histories, is describing a situation where the book Soledad Brother by George Jackson, which you should all read and which is to this day still banned in prisons, was punishable if found reading it. And Tyrone was talking about, I spent 4 months in the box for wanting to read George Jackson, and nowadays I see it in the trash. And as Burton described earlier, young kids are coming in having no radical movement out here to inform them, having the internal movement suppressed, not knowing how to read, being more susceptible to the manipulation of the digital communications that Burton describes in the epilogue, the cutting edge of the carceral war, but that this young brother is reflective of a version of what we see in our classrooms, for instance. Students coming into my classroom are often underprepared for critical thinking, certain levels of literacy, are often underprepared in terms of a pre-existing radical consciousness that would inform their attitudes and behaviors and preferences and focus in our classes, and leaves them as students more susceptible to liberal, reformist, or albeit or flat out reactionary, anti-black, pro-imperial, pro-capitalist ideas that dominate the academic environment in a similar way they're meant to dominate the prison environment. In fact, I can't, another parallel that I can't help but think of in terms of my own experience, the radical politics I sought to implement in grad school led me to certain problems. And when I was consigned to that I was sent to a certain office space in the corner of the building as a sort of carceral punishment of sorts, I found slated to be thrown away in the trash a set of communication theory journals in which some radical ideas about emancipatory journalism and anti-colonial media making being headed to the trash. It's not a perfect analogy, of course, but in some way I do see that this is sort of the overlap. The prison is desirous of throwing away George Jackson as much as the academic environment is interested in throwing away anti-colonial media theory. And as Burton concludes the book, Attica is a living tradition of criminalized black radicalism born and nurtured amid conditions of war. Attica is racist state repression. Attica is revolutionary abolitionism. Please don't stop here. Continue to read, revisit, as I have. A third reading of this book continues to reveal so much we didn't even really get to cover and focus on, because there's an endless set of streams and tributaries you can follow intellectually and politically. There's so much to follow up on in terms of the footnotes, the ideas, the histories, the stories, but please keep this in your media diet and literature rotation of sorts. Bring it into other work you're doing, and as you continue your university experience and beyond, share it with your friends and family. Specifically, the book itself, but also encourage a revisitation of some of the ideas. You can check out our work at Black Liberation Media, and on my website if you want more on some of the people involved and histories, and I'm happily around to help, and I'm around to happily help you connect with some of these ideas and beyond. As we move past this class, just send me an email. Again, I hope you've enjoyed this half as much at least as I have, and continue to critically think and continue to ask, how do I know what I know? And why do I like what I like? And as always, thank you very much again. Peace, only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. Have a great rest of your summer, and good luck going forward. Peace, everybody.